Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. You know what? This is our 40th episode, and it's your 40th birthday. Are these things, how amazing is that?
No, it's not my 40th birthday. And
it is your birthday, though.
And also, if you say that, everyone knows you're significantly older than I. So if you want to age me up.
People don't know that.
You're just 8. I mean, I think they know that.
I get a lot of DMs going like, you seem so much more immature than Kiernan.
Fair point. Fair point. No, Ryan, today, in honor of my not 40th birthday, I'm going to play for you an interview that I've done. It's with two authors named Miriam Murcutt and Richard Starks, and they wrote a book called Room with a Pew. I believe I've maybe mentioned this to you before.
Yes, you've talked about a lot of rooms and pews, so it's hard to know.
This is the first time they'll be united together,
right?
Because Miriam and Richard,
you don't have a pew like in your bedroom. I feel like you would,
Ryan. Funny thing you should say that, because do you know that my mother and my uncle, when they were children, were actually featured in a print advertisement for at-home kneelers.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I could have used those for World Pride.
Yeah. Oh, Ryan.
Oh.
So what Miriam and Richard did was they took a road trip around Spain, and they planned the road trip so that they would only stay at monasteries and convents along the way.
And this is before Airbnb, so this is really hard to do, right?
That's right, because you're right. The book was actually written and published in 2012. And I read it back then, and it's stuck with me since because it's just so quirky and fun. So later on, we're going to hear from Miriam Murcutt and Richard Starks, authors of Room with a Pew. But first, there's a weird bit of news this week. I don't know whether you saw this story. Did you read the story about the woman who fell asleep on a plane?
I saw it in my newsfeed, but I did not click on it.
Yeah, okay. It's a real weird one. So there's this woman, Tiffany O'Brien, and she's on an Air Canada flight. She had been in Quebec City. She's flying back to Toronto. She falls asleep. She gets very comfortable in her seat, falls asleep, wakes up to discover that she is in a pitch black, very cold plane with nobody else on it.
It sounds like a Twilight Zone episode or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially, she realizes that she fell asleep on the plane. They landed, deplaned, moved the plane far out onto the tarmac, locked her up for the night, shut off the electricity, shut off all the lights, and she slept through all of that.
I'm confused as to how this happens. Like, don't they check to make sure everyone is off the plane before they put it away for the night?
Especially because she was in an aisle seat, which, like, of all the seats I think you could, like, realistically hide in, I would think an aisle seat would be one of the more primary viewpoints.
I can't even check my email on the tarmac in an aisle seat without him catching me, you know?
Yeah. Sir, is that an airplane mode? That doesn't appear to be an airplane mode. Yeah, and so she's faced with this crisis of, like, how do I get off the plane? And she quickly calls a friend and says, I'm stuck on this plane. I'm at the airport. The friend said, that's incredible. What's going to happen? She tries.
What's going to happen? What a useful friend that is.
She tries to start a FaceTime, and the phone goes dead.
No.
Yeah, so she can't even use the flashlight on it.
Yeah.
So she makes her way, feels her way to the cockpit, tries to radio into the airport.
Wait, so she got into the cockpit?
Yeah, of course, because I think they probably just left it right open.
Well, we're lucky she didn't have any nefarious ideas.
Yeah, absolutely
I thought these planes are supposed to be kept under lock and key, and it's
totally
like letting
true.
people sleep in them.
And so there's no electricity on there, but she finds a flashlight.
Sure.
So she goes to the door of the plane, and she opens it, and she looks down, and she sees there's like 40, 50 feet to drop to the tarmac, so she can't do that. She goes in her head, she's like, can I form some sort of rope so that I can crawl down to the tarmac and
Couldn't
walk?
she hit the button that it would pop that thing out like that happens in an airplane, where they slide down?
Yeah,
is that a real thing?
I have not seen any coverage that talks about why she didn't use the emergency door. That's exactly what I was thinking. I would go immediately. In fact, I would go to the emergency door before I would go to the regular door because, of course, you're going to be high up.
Yeah, I've waited my whole life to use the emergency exit on a plane.
Absolutely. I've agreed verbally every time.
many, many times. Yeah.
And so she opens the door. She can't drop out. So she kind of dangles her legs over the side. And with the flashlight, she aims towards the far-off airport. And she's doing ... dash.
She's doing
in Morse
SOS.
code.
Yeah.
SOS with
Amazing.
the flashlight.
Was she a Girl Scout as a kid or something? She's resourceful.
I couldn't tell. She does seem pretty resourceful. But it turns out this doesn't get anybody's attention. So
probably a lot of blinking lights in the airport.
And by the way, she of course, I should say, can't recharge her phone because the electricity of the entire plane is off.
Oh, yeah.
And so luckily, the friend who she had gotten through to had called the airport and said, "Hey, Toronto, you've got a passenger who's, in a coffin-like state out there. You need to go fetch him." She's fetched by one of those little luggage carts.
Doesn't that sound like a prank call? You're sitting up there at the airport at 1 in the morning, you get a phone call, and it's like, there's a person stuck on the plane. It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And my refrigerator's running.
And Prince Albert's in a can. All right. And so she gets in, and, Air Canada's very apologetic. They offer to put her up in a hotel and get her a limo. She just wants to go home. And she says she's having like really traumatic side effects afterwards. 10 days out, she's still freaking out, and she's recorded it all on social media. And now it's out in the news. I mean, it certainly sounds like she might be gearing up for quite a good lawsuit.
She has a good lawsuit from what I can tell.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Do we know why this happened yet?
No, Air Canada's investigating it, but there's no clear reason why this would happen. But I will say that if I were on that jury, I do think that first I would tell her, what are you complaining about? Like, sleeping this deeply is my dream. I haven't slept. Think of all the things that she slept through. She slept through that loud landing, that part where they have to slow the plane down and slam on the brakes, where everybody's hitting each other with their suitcases and rushing off, where the flight attendants are saying, thank you very much, thank you, have a great day. And then all of the logistics of actually getting it and parking it. It's just like, this woman sleeps more soundly than anyone I've ever met.
The story just doesn't add up to me. Like, I still don't understand how they could just leave her on the plane. Does it make any sense?
No, it makes no sense.
Maybe they do things different in Canada. They land and they're just like, maybe she wants to rest. We don't want to wake her. That'd be rude.
Let them let themselves off.
Yeah.
So, we're going to be following this story closely. Absolutely. I will say, can you think of any other? Say that she had landed and the phone hadn't worked. If you were in her shoes, how would you have gotten off the plane? First, we both agree, emergency exit, get that slide down.
Right.
Maybe take some of those little bottles of water from the pantry, but wet down that slide. You could have a slip and slide, have a little fun.
Yeah. I would have probably rated the mini bar. I would have been like, I would have just had like a night,
I would have had a night. That's true. The solitude sounds quite lovely.
Yeah. And your phone is dead. And if your boss gets mad at you, you can't be like, look, I was literally trapped on an abandoned plane. What do you want from me?
I also think something that might occur to me is to take all of those inflatable life vests and put them on every part of my body and inflate them and then jump off that 40 to 50 foot drop and just hope that that's enough padding. Maybe throw a bunch of them down and try to land on the tarmac, just completely ensconced in those.
Yeah, that would definitely make your lawsuit stronger.
Yeah, my family would make millions in my memory.
That's the best that we can do,
I do wonder, though, do you think that these planes actually have keys that they remove? Like, I feel like she should have been able to turn the plane on. I can't say I would know where in the cockpit that would be, but I would think they'd just leave the keys in.
Do they have keys?
I don't know. I'm assuming they have
this
keys.
is gonna be a recalculating. We're gonna have to revisit this because there's gonna be some follow up to this story where we figure out that she had hidden like the carry-on over
the compartment.
Yeah,
Sure.
Something went down.
She had shifted during flight.
Right. Right.
But I think you're right. It's good that she didn't have nefarious motives because I think she could have just taken that thing and rammed it right into the airport.
Yeah, I mean, that would have gotten their attention, right? More than that little SOS.
So anyway, if you have any further information on Tiffany O'Brien, or hey, Tiffany O'Brien, if you want to come talk to us on the podcast, please do. We've got an email. It's
outofofficepod@gmail.com.
out of office, but not to be confused with our Instagram, which is OOO podcast. Podcast.
Very good branding we got
Strong
going.
branding. It's a good thing that's not the business that we're in. Now, Ryan, I haven't been to church for a couple hours now, and so I'm feeling like I need us to get to the interview. So let's get to. I've got the full title here. I called it just "Room with a Pew." The subtitle, fantastic: "Sleeping Our Way Through Spain's Ancient Monasteries." This is the first time we had to do a phone interview. And so I ended up using a piece of technology I'm not 100% sure we're going to go back to. So the quality is just okay. Not like it wasn't taped in studio like ours is.
Right.
And so I do apologize for the quality, but it doesn't get in the way of the content. So with that, tell the cabin crew.
It's time to take off.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
On the phone with me are authors Miriam Murcutt and Richard Starks, co-authors of a unique travel book that I picked up, I think right when it was published in 2012. And it has stuck with me ever since. It's cheekily and very punnily called Room with a Pew, P-E-W, Sleeping Our Way Through Spain's Ancient Monasteries. Miriam and Richard, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, well, pleased to be here.
Now, as folks will pick up, your book basically recounts, it's kind of part travelogue, kind of tongue-in-cheek humor recounting of a road trip that you both took through Spain where you exclusively stayed at religious buildings, monasteries, and convents. You managed to weave into not just the travelogue and the reporting of individual personalities that you meet, but also the history and lore of the Catholic Church. And so I'm interested to hear how did you come out of this trip viewing the church? What did you learn that either for positive or for negative?
Well, the point of the trip really was to travel through Spain, which we've done many, many times before. And we wanted to go back and do something slightly different from staying in hotels or pensions or other forms of accommodation. So we chose the monasteries primarily as a sort of a different way or a fun way to travel through Spain. So it didn't really change our views or my views of the church in any kind of way, because it wasn't really that kind of trip. It was more of a fun trip rather than a search for God or a religious experience.
That's it's funny to think that you conceived of a fun trip and thought, I know, monasteries.
Well, I would say, perhaps we should say the word interesting and involving there, but it was fun too. I mean, monks and nuns do laugh, actually, in between their praying, and they are very lively people in many ways. And of course, as many of them don't have that much contact with the outside world because they're cloistered, we were sort of, I like to think, perhaps a breath of fresh air sometimes.
So give us a sense of, in speaking about cloistered, what does that mean when you have a cloistered order? And maybe just give us a sense of what does it mean that there are different monastic orders?
Well, cloistered basically means that they have made the commitment to give their life entirely over to God, and they stay within the community, within the monastery walls. That's by far not the only type of monastic order that there is. I mean, there are other orders that are teaching orders that go out and mix in the community or proselytize. The Cistercians and the Benedictines tend to be cloistered, whereas the Franciscans and Dominicans tend to be teaching orders. And there are a vast number and variety of monastic orders in the world.
And it's a reoccurring theme in your book, this kind of sense of locked doors and walls that you're not allowed behind. And it seems to me like that's part of the kind of mysterious fun of entering any one of these individual monasteries. I know one of the scenes that really sticks with me is where you're interacting with a nun who basically has to stay behind a cage wall because she's basically not allowed to come out and interact with you directly, right?
Yes, that's right. In fact, it was even more interesting because she wasn't just behind this barred cage. She was actually serving us breakfast.
Right.
It was actually in the Trinitarian monastery, de la Purísima Concepción in San Jose, which is in El Toboso, which is sort of the Cervantes part of Spain. And this nun was required to serve us tea through the bars. A boiling hot kettle of water was thrust through the bars of us. We were sitting at the other side on a wonderful little bistro-type table, completely on our own. This was private, individual service. There was no one else there except Richard and me and the nun. And then she threaded a loaf of bread through the bars, and then we were handed little pots of jam through the bars. And then when all the necessary bits and pieces of breakfast were on the table, she sat down at the other side of the bars and watched us eat. It was quite disconcerting in many ways.
I mean, this is what I mean by saying that it's fun, because when you stay in monasteries, you've absolutely no idea what's going to happen. And each experience is different. I mean, there are obviously broad similarities because of the layout of the monasteries and the function of the monasteries. But you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're going to find there. And each night stay is a bit of an adventure.
I was going to say one of the things that adds to the surprise and the novelty is the fact that monasteries are often very old, very large buildings. And nowadays, of course, the monks and nuns, the communities there, can't afford to keep them lit all the time. So often the monk or the nun that's taking you to wherever goes into the room first, and you enter in total darkness, and then the lights switched on, and bingo, you're in this wonderful refectory or in this wonderful library. So there's that element, a real element of surprise too. You never literally know what you're going to see when the light goes on.
And what should visitors expect from the accommodations, recognizing that they can be different monastery to monastery? Does it feel like a hotel room?
Well, some of them do. I mean, they vary quite a bit in standard, but basically all the rooms have everything you need without necessarily any excesses. So that you typically find a couple of beds, a table and chairs, somewhere to put your clothes, maybe a crucifix on the wall. But there'll be a bathroom en suite, sink, shower, toilet, and that kind of thing. But it's all very, very clean, very, very basic, with one exception, which is a luxury, is the sheets and towels will always be extremely well laundered, because a lot of these monasteries make extra money by taking in laundry from nearby hotels, for example, or hospitals. And so they have commercial-sized operations, a lot of them. So the linen is notably very, very good indeed.
I was also struck, it seems to be quite economical to stay at these places, even though that, some of the communities are relying on them for income. Several of them were actually free.
Yes, some of them are free because they do follow the rule of Saint Benedict, which basically says that you have to treat visitors like Christ, and some of them take that literally. And,
that sounds pretty good, except for when he turns like 33. What did you learn about the daily schedule of the religious that live in these communities?
Well,
arduous.
Yeah. The cloistered orders do tend to, follow the liturgy of the hours. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 services a day. Some of them starting what one would consider to be in the middle of the night, and they come at pretty rapid intervals. In between that, the monks and nuns have work to do. They have their own individual praying to do. So it's a pretty, actually, you may think it's a relaxing way to live, but it's actually quite a busy day. were always the process really of coming or going to or from the church.
Well, and it's a very structured existence as well. And I think the first prayer of the day begins at 3 a.m. I think, right?
It does in some monasteries, not all of them necessarily, but it does in some. But they do, as Miriam says. I mean, the praying is what you do. I mean, you were there in the monastery to serve God, to communicate with God, and you pray 8 times a day communally, and of course, whatever praying you may want to do on your own in private. So, I mean, that is the main activity, other than the physical work to maintain the monastery and keep it running.
And I love this point that Miriam made about when you never quite know what's going to be behind a locked door in a darkened room. And it sounds like part of the fun is not just wandering the monasteries. A number of times you're speaking to a nun or a monk who, has to kind of give you a sideways glance and say, well, I'm really not supposed to take you in this room, but maybe just for a moment. And maybe you can give us a sense of some of the treasures that you found buried inside these monasteries when you were allowed further in.
Well, there are obviously numerous works of art and numerous sort of architectural details in the monastery themselves, which are very historic value. And then a number of the monasteries also have museums, and I think the particular one we remember there is the Dominican monastery of Santo Tomas in Avila. Now, the Dominican order is a teaching order, and so these friars, they're not called monks, they're a teaching order, they're called friars. So the friars there had to travel all over the world, proselytizing and also helping with the sick and the poor. And they had brought back quite a lot of booty with them from their various trips.
Well, this was the Dominican monastery, and as Miriam says, they've done a lot of proselytizing in the Far East, and so a lot of what they brought back came from there. There's a wide range of Japanese prints, for example, some tapestries and screens, but it was very much a mixed bag. Musical instruments. I remember a bamboo mouth organ, which I'd never seen before. There was a lot of Buddhas there, believe it or not. Furniture, plates, cups. And I think the oldest thing we saw there was a 5th century BC prayer bell that somebody had brought back. I don't know how they acquired it, but it was one of the oldest things in the monastery. But this is true of most of the monasteries, because the monasteries have been around for centuries, many of them, and so they've acquired a lot of things, a lot of stuff. I mean, you imagine what you acquire in your attic over a period of about 10 years. Well, these people have been around for 8 or 9 centuries. And sometimes they've been extremely rich during the course of their lifetime. Sometimes they've been poor. But they've received a tremendous number of treasures as donations. And it's one of the fun things that of staying in a monastery. It's different from a holiday inn. I mean, you can open a door and find a 15th century painting, or you can open the door and find some first edition books in the library, some as old as, in fact, going back to the printing press in the 15th century. So I believe the Monasterio de Santo Tomas was also the one that had a menagerie, did it not?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, a few decades ago, I think, I'm not sure of the exact date, but it must have been 50s or 60s, Santo Tomas decided to set up a proper university, because the Dominicans are a teaching order, and they had hoped to attract students to study, natural history, obviously, religion, philosophy, that type of thing. Now, I don't think it panned out too well, because they couldn't attract, times had changed, and people weren't attracted, I think, possibly to the type of courses they offered. But in order to sustain those courses, they had collected, particularly to sustain their natural history course, they had collected a vast variety of stuffed birds and animals which they had gathered all together in an extremely disorganized fashion into a room up there near their museum. And so we were shown in there by the friar that was showing us around. And again, walk into a dark room, light switched on, and lo and behold, we had a whole variety of stuffed crocodiles, tigers, lions, a walrus pinned over the doorway. All these animals were staring at us with their dead eyes, rather a frightening fashion. Birds swooping down from wires in the ceiling.
Yeah, and had a wolf, some guinea pigs. There was a huge black bear rearing up on its hind legs. They had a couple of alligators, lots of snakes, some squirrels, monkeys, and some kind of hornbilled bird, which I didn't recognize, but apparently it's now extinct. And this is one of the few specimens left in the world. And these are all stuffed into this one room. It is the sort of display you might see in the Natural History Museum in London or Paris or New York, and it's just hidden away in a back room, essentially, in this monastery, while the monks there figure out what they're going to do with it.
Yes, they don't really know where they should be sent back to. This is the trouble, so they're sort of stuck with them.
And I love the idea of just having come upon this room and seeing, an entire a zoo worth of stuffed animals, with sort of this reluctance of, we don't know how we got them, but they've been here for centuries, and so if anybody wants them, we'd be willing to return them. Anyone who's traveled within cathedrals or churches may know that Catholics have a particular fondness for what are called relics. And relics are basically pieces of the saints that have been saved and distributed at churches. Every altar has a piece of a saint inside of it. And it's maybe a little bit gory, but if you're like me and Ryan, you grew up in Catholicism, it's kind of, when you're thinking about eating body and drinking blood, it doesn't seem like that far of a jump. And so you kind of lead the book with your exposure to one of the most famous relics. So why don't you tell us about St. Teresa of Ecstasy fame?
Well, the main thing we saw about St. Teresa was her finger, which is one of the relics you mentioned. She is, of course, a very famous saint. There are thousands of saints, and she is one of the top tier ones. And
yes.
She is actually officially, she's the patron saint of those who have headaches. That's her official sainthood. But when she died, the church allowed, in fact, encouraged various parts of a saint's body to be cut off or chopped up so they could be shown to the faithful. And Teresa lost her right hand, I think, her whole right arm, right foot, the left thigh, and a portion of her jaw. But and also, I think she lost her heart. But the bit we saw was her finger, which was retained in the bottle by the monastery in Avila, and it was just set in a holder in the gift shop. Well, I think they put it in the gift shop because a lot of people who go to the church want to see the relic, and of course, in order to get them to see the relic, you have to go through the gift shop.
So how was St. Teresa's finger holding up?
Well, it was in good shape. I mean, it was sort of slightly cracked. The fingernail was fully in place. It was a bit blackened. It was a bit long, perhaps. It perhaps could do with a trim, but I don't suppose anybody's got the nerve to do that. But it was recognizably a finger. There's no doubt about it. Although whose finger it was, of course, you have to take on faith.
And of course, they displayed it so that it was actually making a rather rude gesture. So it could be displayed more.
Yeah, I think I would have displayed it lying down rather than pointing straight up.
That's tremendous. You got to have interviews and one-on-one conversations with the religious. And I'm wondering if any of those really stick with you, whether you've kept in touch with anyone.
No, I mean, first of all, we were very lucky to be allowed, particularly in the cloistered orders, to speak to anyone. And so the notion of keeping in touch isn't really, other than keeping in touch with Jesus, isn't really part of the mission of the cloistered orders. so they tend to have a representative, a monk or a nun, who deals with, people like us who come in and want to see around the monasteries. On the other hand, the Dominican monastery, the Santo Thomas one, a lot of retired friars lived there. And so they were wandering around all over the place and only too happy to, tag along and show you things like the museum we mentioned and the animals, the dead animals. And, they were very happy to give you a grand tour for as many hours as you wanted to. And then in Marchena, we went to a convent, a Franciscan Clarissa convent. And when we arrived, the church was just bursting at the seams with noise and light and music. And this was the townsfolk celebrating the arrivals of some new novices to enlarge the community there, the religious community there. And the religious community there is entirely black and entirely from Africa. And this is very interesting. I mean, it's very unusual. And we discovered that the monastery there was in danger of being seized back by the family that had given it to the church several decades, centuries ago. And the reason they were going to be able to seize it back is because the community of nuns there was dwindling, and they only had about 2 or 3 left. And once those nuns were dead, and then the family of the person who bequeathed the monastery in the first place was going to close it down and take it back. And so in order to prevent this happening, the townsfolk went out on a missionary trip to Africa and recruited nuns to come over to staff, if you like, that monastery again. And so there were a lot of nuns from Tanzania and from Kenya, very young. This is quite unusual because most of the monastic communities are quite elderly. And they were an extremely lively, hip, dancing group of nuns. And they were participating fully in this service for the novices. There was music, then there was food, and it was really sort of just like a very, very lively party. But then when the party was over, they retreated behind the walls again and claimed perhaps to be a more serious community than they appeared to be. So that was a very interesting opportunity to meet with a whole load of very, very young nuns. And they've been doing, their mission in Marchena was really to, help the sick and the poor, and obviously to worship God. But they were, they were completely a completely open community, even though they claimed to be cloistered. I wouldn't have called them particularly cloistered.
But this is, go back to the point we made earlier, really. This is one of the fun things about staying in monasteries, because you initially sort of implied that they didn't sound like much fun. But again, it is, when you turn up, you just don't know what to expect. And we turned up at this monastery, and within the first half hour, we joined in this sort of celebratory party. And I remember a nun giving me a kiss on both cheeks, which I think is slightly unusual in a monastery or a nunnery. And within half an hour, somebody else was putting a beer in my hand, and we were having tapas and canapes because we were celebrating the arrival of these novices from...
Well, if there's one thing I know, people underestimate the partying spirit of us Catholics. We always have wine, and, what happens in the sacristy stays in the sacristy. So for those whose appetite has been whet for planning this sort of trip, I'm going to include in the show notes some links out to the sort of monastery guides and the individual websites of some that we've spoken about today. But my last question is, do you have any recommendations just logistically about how to plan or how to prepare to actually take on a road trip or visit a monastery like this in Spain?
Well, I would say that if there are monasteries, we're looking specifically at Spain, there are monasteries all over Spain. And so I would first of all decide the route you want to go on. And then after that, look at the monasteries that might be available to you to stay in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think, the good way to approach it. And then look at, the various orders that you might be interested in visiting. And then a lot of the monasteries now have websites. And go and check. And you can tell from the tenor of the website whether they're going to be very open to visitors or whether you should really only go there if you want to go on retreat. And, as we did in the Las Escalonias monastery, which was a Trappist monastery, we joined in completely with the community of monks then and got up to the 3 o'clock service and attended all of the service throughout the day, which was very, very rewarding, actually, to be part of that community for a few days. But with the Marchena monastery, they were quite happy if we used it as a base, like a hotel.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I think our more intrepid listeners will definitely be checking out those websites and should certainly check out the book, which we will also link to, Room with a Pew, Sleeping Our Way Through Spain's Ancient Monasteries. Miriam Murcutt and Richard Starks, thank you so much.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you.
Now it's time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
Wow. Well,
it's a good one, right?
Yeah. Well, I have stayed in I've been invited to stay in many a monastery, but I've never actually done it. So it sounds like a fascinating way to travel.
Yeah, I thought that the stuff you can find inside these monasteries just goes to show that the Catholic Church still has it when it comes to plundering far-off lands. And the idea that you could just kind of like turn a corner, get behind a locked door, and have no clue as to what you were going to find back there.
Literally, it could be anything.
It could be anything. Well, thank you again to Miriam Murcutt and Richard Starks for chatting with me. It's a great book. We will include a link to it in the show notes. Absolutely pick it up. Now, Ryan, we are here in the last stop. I believe you're familiar with this segment.
Yeah, the people segment.
It's popularly known as the people segment. It's your favorite segment, my favorite segment. It's the last segment of the show where each week you and I take a moment, breather. It's a sort of meditation for us. And we each say, even during the workday week when we're rushing, what is one thing that we did or tasted or thought about or bought that fed the spirit of wanderlust within us? So, Ryan, I have to ask you, what is your last stop this week?
My last stop this week takes place in the great state of Alabama.
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic. We love all places, Kiernan.
Absolutely. We love all places and states. I do think they're passing a few laws I don't agree with these days, but that doesn't mean the people of Alabama are all bad.
No, but this is about the bees of Alabama.
Like the birds and the bees, because that is not their specialty.
No. This is about actual bees, wasp.
Do they know the bees on the top of Notre Dame?
Well, these bees are scary. Okay.
Those bees are scary. They survived a fire.
Well, these bees would probably do the same because there's this issue happening. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's this thing happening called climate change.
Yeah.
And that is changing.
Well, that's a theory.
Right. The folks in Alabama might not believe it.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, it's going on. So what usually happens when you have a wasp nest in your house or something in Alabama, there's this thing called winter that happens that they freeze and it kills all the bees except for the queen bee because the queen bee actually has some type of antifreeze in her blood because she's super badass, right?
You and I seem to have some antifreeze in our blood. It's hard to get us cold.
Yeah, no, I've never been cold. I'm just hot all the time.
I've read about it.
So this guy, James Barron, just a regular nice guy from Alabama, goes into his shed one day, looks up, and he sees a wasp nest. He looks up and he sees a wasp nest.
Oh, so we're not talking about bees. We're talking about wasps.
Wasps. Okay. I mean, they're a kind of bee, right?
Yeah.
He looks up and he sees one the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. Okay? And this thing is called a super hive.
Wait, the hive, not the hive is the size of a Volkswagen Beetle,
Yes.
or there's a single wasp.
No, I mean maybe if they let it get long enough, because what happens is in these areas where you have wasps and they don't die in the winter, they continue to build out their nest,
just continuously build.
They're hard workers, and so what you get these super nests that can house 15 to 18,000 wasps.
Sure.
And they expect to find over 100 in Alabama this season because of the abnormally warm winter.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, the pictures of these things are absolutely horrifying.
Should I throw one up on the Instagram?
Oh, we're going to put some on the Instagram.
All right.
Absolutely.
At OOO podcast.
Yeah.
This is a thing to see. I'm looking at it right now, and it's not a beetle that I would want to get in.
No, I mean, and they tell you if you see one of these things after you Instagram it, you should call a professional because this is not like, this guy tried to spray it with like a little bottle of bee killer.
Bottle, yeah.
And this is a super high. This thing was like, what? This little, and of course he was stung many times.
Sure.
And people have been seriously injured because, again, this is a lot of wasps. And wasps are not like, your little honeybees. They can sting you over and over and over again. So 18,000 wasps times as many as they want to sting you is really the limit here for the upper limit of stinging. So
I mean, it's pretty ironic that the nest is the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, when in fact it's the home of another insect species altogether.
Look, I think it would be cool if they actually just kind of gave a wasp, put a bunch of wasps in a beetle and see if they could fill it up with just hive material. That would be pretty cool.
I also like this last stop because you've got a couple of Catholics. We've already talked Catholic today. Now we're moving on to wasps.
Oh my God!
Now, Ryan, I do have to ask. It seems to me like this story you're telling us maybe stretches the purpose of the last stop. So,
no, I disagree completely.
Can you tell me?
Bee travel is a real thing. We talked about bees with Notre Dame quite a bit. People like bees.
That's true.
If you saw this, would you not tell people, I was in Alabama and I went to see a super hive?
So are you saying that potentially we are recommending to our listeners that this would be something to seek out whilst in Alabama?
For lack of anything else to do, I think going to see a super hive might be pretty exciting.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, if you're far away from Birmingham, you're looking for things to do. You got to fill the day.
And they said there's going to be 100 of them. And once they get rid of the wasp, it's probably a neat little thing to look at,
True.
But be careful that you don't like poke at it and it falls on you or something because, these are very, very dangerous super hives.
Yeah, you want to be careful.
Be careful. So what is
you want to hold on. You want to be careful.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah, because you said it first. Was that intended?
No.
All right.
I don't make dad jokes. So yeah. So Kiernan, let's buzz over to you. What's your last stop?
All right. It says the man who just said he doesn't make dad jokes. All right, Ryan. Well, okay. Today, I'm finally going to get to, I only bought 2 souvenirs when I went on that Pacific Northwest trip.
Really?
Yeah, only 2 souvenirs, really
were they
limited
both
myself.
Teddy Roosevelt related?
Neither.
What?
Teddy Roosevelt related, in fact.
But they were economical.
And this week, I'm going to introduce one of those souvenirs. Now, you may remember, great episode we've got back in the archive. You remember it's about souvenirs and how to select perfect souvenirs.
I believe it's called Souvenirs.
It's called Souvenirs 101. I see you haven't revisited it lately, but if you haven't listened to that, it's important for you to know I have a specific approach to souvenir buying, and it's built around the 3 Ps. Now, Ryan, I know you've occasionally struggled to remember what the 3 Ps were. So, do you remember the Ps? Price, absolutely. I mean, you don't want to break the bank just for a little tchotchke.
Portability.
Portability is exactly right. And most importantly...
prestige.
No, so close. The last one, I'm proud of you for getting 2.
Yeah.
Correct.
2's pretty good.
2's not bad.
Yeah.
The final one and the most important one is...
potency.
Potency. Exactly
I got it.
Right.
I got it before you said it.
You got it. You got it before I said it. You get partial credit.
Yeah.
Okay. So I bought a toy, and I really like toys. I have a weakness for toys. I enjoy a nice, well-designed toy to put up on a bookshelf and remind me of a place that I've been. And this one harks to a Native American tradition to the Pacific Northwest, continuing up into Alaska, and that's the tradition of the totem pole. And what this toy is this beautifully designed wooden totem pole, and it's made by a company called Bajo. It may be pronounced Bajo, but it's Bajo. And it's this gorgeously designed, very colorful piece that I will put up on the Instagram. And what you can do is you can teach kids about the artistry of totem pole building And you can take these blocks off and rearrange them so that you can see different animal shapes in them.
I like that.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
It's very cool. It's very imaginative. I've had a great time just having it on my coffee table and rearranging it myself. It's really bringing me back to the Pacific Northwest, thus that potency. I will say on the portability front, a little hard to bring back. Luckily, I had enough room in my bag to get it. And price-wise, only $35, and I got it at an independent bookstore. So I feel pretty good about it overall. The only thing that made me feel less good about it was that when I came home and started to look into this company, because I like it so much, I thought maybe I want to buy some more stuff from here. I did realize that Bajo's beautiful wooden toys, and I'm going to quote here, have been designed and manufactured in Poland over the last 25 years. So this is not sort of true to tradition totem pole, I suppose.
A Polish totem pole?
That's right. It's a totem Polish.
A totem Polish.
Yeah, it's a totem pole. It's actually a totem pole. It was made by a totem pole.
Wow. Who knew that one of the industries that the Polish had was manufacturing totem pole toys?
No, very few did, but I can't say that I'm saddened. I think it's a great teaching opportunity for kids, and it's a fun, imaginative play for adults. So I'll post a picture of it up on the Instagram because I do think it's worth seeing, and you'll see it's also kind of hip and modern. I think you're gonna like it.
I'm very excited about it. So what are we going to talk about next week, Kiernan?
So Ryan, on July 20th, we are celebrating a major anniversary as a country and as a world. It is the anniversary of the moon landing. And one cool little fact, they have actually completely refurbished and reopened to the public Mission Control Center. You know that iconic room like in Apollo 13, Apollo
Houston,
11?
we have a problem.
Exactly. So
Right.
Down in Houston at the Johnson Space Center, they reopened and recreated what mission control looked like during the Apollo era. And so I have an interview next week with those who were in charge of curating it and bringing us back to the 1960s in Houston. So tune in next week to hear about how you can make mission control accessible to the public.
Well, until then, Houston, we have an episode for you next week.
Brutal.
I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken. You wouldn't have to ask that on a spacecraft because they're very tight on seats.
There's not that many seats.
No, very few seats.
That's true. There's a lot of seats in that mission control room, for what I remember. It's a pretty big place.
Absolutely.